You felt it. That strange sense that something isn't quite right with the world. A glitch in how you perceive reality. You question things others don't. You sense patterns behind events. See meaning in what others dismiss as coincidence. You're told it's just your imagination, just thoughts, just neurons firing in a biological machine. But it doesn't feel like just anything. Feels like a shift, like waking up inside a dream. The moment you begin questioning the script society hands you, from what you should believe to how you should live, something starts happening. You feel pulled toward deeper truths, not because you read a book or followed a guru, but because something inside you stirred. The old version of you begins to fade, and whether it terrifies or excites you, you can't go back to sleep. Most people chalk this up to a spiritual awakening. But even that phrase has been hijacked by vague explanations, New Age cliches, and superficial rituals. You deserve better. You deserve the real science that explains exactly what's happening inside you when you awaken, and why it feels like everything is shifting. This is not a mystical rant. This is about a cutting-edge theory that merges neuroscience and quantum physics into a model so disruptive, it threatens to rewrite everything we know about consciousness. This is about ORCH-OR, the orchestrated objective reduction theory developed by physicist Sir Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Dr. Stuart Hameroff. And this is where the game changes. ORCH-OR suggests your consciousness isn't confined to your brain. It isn't a byproduct of synapses or electrochemical pulses. It is something deeper, far more mysterious, and far more powerful. This theory doesn't reduce you to biology. It points to something within you that interacts with the very quantum fabric of reality. Not metaphorically, literally. And that means spiritual awakening may not be a woo-woo experience. It may be the most advanced biological phenomenon humanity is only beginning to understand. That tremor you feel when you question everything, that disorientation, that heightened awareness, that isn't your mind breaking. It's your perception expanding, and your biology is equipped to handle it. This is where we separate the nonsense from the real breakthrough. Because if this theory is right, your awakening isn't accidental. It isn't mental illness. It isn't a phase. It's the result of a hidden mechanism inside your own brain, microtubules operating at the quantum level coming online. This isn't about belief. This is about pattern recognition, suppressed knowledge, and the mechanism behind what spiritual traditions have hinted at for centuries. You are not becoming spiritual. You are becoming aware. And today we expose the lies that kept you in the dark, and the science that proves you were always more than flesh and blood. Your entire life you've been told consciousness is just a byproduct of the brain. That your thoughts, awareness, even your identity are just electrical activity inside a 3-pound organ between your ears. That you're nothing more than biology. A machine made of meat, reacting to chemical signals and external stimuli. That's the foundational story modern science has sold you. But it's a story built on assumptions, and it's collapsing under its own weight. Let's break it down. The dominant model of consciousness in Western science is called materialism. This model claims everything in the universe, including your mind, can be reduced to matter and energy. Under this view, consciousness is emergent, meaning it pops into existence when neurons interact in complex enough ways. No spirit, no soul, no deeper self, just random firing of biological circuits. But there's a problem. No scientist, no lab, no brain scan has ever explained how electrical activity becomes experience. How a signal in the brain becomes the color red, the sound of music, or the feeling of love. This problem is so unsolvable. It's been called the hard problem of consciousness. And the more we study the brain, the stranger it gets. Brain scans can show areas lighting up when we feel certain emotions. But they don't explain how awareness arises. They show correlation, not causation. It's like watching lights turn on in a city from a satellite image and trying to figure out how people are falling in love in those buildings. The map is not the territory. And here's the catch. The harder neuroscientists try to explain consciousness through physical processes alone, the more they run into paradoxes. For example, some patients under anesthesia report full awareness during surgery, yet their brains show no activity in areas linked to consciousness. Others have had near-death experiences, describing events in real time, while clinically brain-dead. If consciousness is only in the brain, how are these experiences even possible? This is where the story starts to crack. Because the dominant scientific model can't explain these phenomena, it either dismisses them or ignores them entirely. You've been conditioned to reject anything that sounds too abstract, even when it makes more sense than the official explanation. That's not science. That's dogma. Let's push further. If your consciousness is just neurons, then your thoughts aren't really yours. They're just chemical events. Free will is an illusion. You're not choosing anything, you're reacting. That removes meaning, depth, and purpose from human existence. And whether or not someone says it out loud, that's the real narrative most people are living under. But there's another way to see this. A different lens that doesn't require abandoning science, but expanding it. Because consciousness may not be produced by the brain at all. It may be filtered through it. Think of the brain not as a generator of consciousness, but as a receiver, like a radio tuned into a signal. The structure of your brain, specifically the microtubules inside your neurons, may allow your awareness to interface with a deeper layer of reality. Not just space and time, but a quantum field of information beyond normal perception. This flips the narrative entirely. It means consciousness isn't limited by the body. And it also means that spiritual experiences, visions, insights, expanded awareness, aren't hallucinations or fantasies. They're shifts in signal. You're tuning into a broader spectrum of reality that your biology can access, but only under certain conditions. This theory aligns not only with ancient spiritual traditions, but also with new discoveries in quantum physics, which is exactly why it's threatening to those who want to keep science and spirituality separate. Because once you allow that consciousness may be fundamental to the universe, not just an accident inside your brain, you open a door that can't be closed. And that's why the lie persists, not because of evidence, but because of fear. Materialism offers control. If everything is physical, everything can be measured, predicted, owned. But consciousness that operates outside physical laws, that's chaos to a system built on hierarchy and dominance. So they mock it. They call it pseudoscience. They build walls around research that questions the narrative. And yet, the cracks keep growing. More scientists are stepping forward. More anomalies are surfacing. And more people like you, are waking up and realizing that their experiences are valid, real, and powerful. You were never broken. You were never too sensitive or overthinking. You were seeing through the cracks in a very old story. And that story is falling apart because it was never the truth. The truth is this: you are not your thoughts. You are not your body. You are the awareness behind both. And that awareness is not bound by space, time, or biology. It's not created by the brain. It is translated through the brain. And when that translation becomes clear, when the signal becomes strong, your entire perception of life begins to shift. That shift is what people call awakening. And it's not mystical nonsense. It's the most advanced, terrifying, and beautiful realization a human being can have. The system you live in isn't ready for it. But you are. Now let's get into the science that proves you're not crazy. The theory that shows how your brain might be wired to tap into a reality most people never even suspect exists. And once you see it, there's no going back. Now that we've cleared away the illusion that your consciousness is just neurons reacting to external input, it's time to step into the theory that threatens the entire structure of modern neuroscience. A theory that doesn't just question the old narrative, it replaces it with something so revolutionary, it's been quietly buried for decades. This is ORCH-OR, the Orchestrated Objective Reduction Theory. On the surface, it sounds like a technical term buried in obscure research. But this is the missing link between science and consciousness. The explanation for why your awakening isn't imagined, isn't mental illness, and isn't a spiritual daydream. It's biological, it's quantum, and it's real. Let's break it down without watering it down. The theory was proposed by two scientists from completely different fields. Sir Roger Penrose, a mathematical physicist and a respected authority in quantum theory, and Dr. Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist who spent his life studying what happens to consciousness when it's shut off and brought back on. Their partnership was born from one question science had never answered. What is the physical mechanism of consciousness? Hameroff noticed something strange in his field. When patients go under anesthesia, consciousness doesn't just go to sleep. It disappears. But not all brain activity stops. Certain regions remain functional. Yet the awareness, the subjective self, is gone. That raised a dangerous question. What if the seat of consciousness isn't where we've been looking? Penrose brought in the quantum piece. He believed consciousness couldn't be explained using classical physics. It required something more fundamental, something that operates outside the predictable binary world of neurons firing. Consciousness, he argued, must involve quantum computation, interactions that happen at the smallest possible scales, where the rules of reality bend. This was more than speculation. It had structure. It had math. It had evidence. And that's where microtubules come in. Microtubules are tiny, hollow tubes inside your neurons. On the surface, they look like scaffolding, like structural support. That's how most neuroscientists dismissed them for years. Just passive architecture. But under the microscope, these structures show patterns, symmetry, lattice-like configurations capable of transmitting information. Penrose and Hameroff proposed that these microtubules are the site of quantum processing inside the brain. Not in the synapses, not in the gray matter, but in the subneuronal level far below what neuroscience was even equipped to measure. These microtubules, they claimed, conduct quantum-level computations that interface with a deeper layer of reality. Here's how it works. Quantum coherence happens when particles exist in multiple states at once, something impossible in classical physics. In this coherent state, information can be processed in ways that defy linear logic. Penrose theorized that at a certain threshold, this coherence collapses not randomly, but objectively based on the structure of spacetime itself. That collapse is what generates a conscious moment, a flash of awareness. And this collapse isn't passive. It's orchestrated, guided by the structure of the microtubules, which filter and align quantum information. That's where the name comes from, orchestrated objective reduction, ORCH-OR. Think about the implications. Every conscious thought, every insight, every shift in awareness could be a quantum event, an interaction between your brain and the very fabric of the universe. You're not observing reality from the outside. You're participating in it at the most fundamental level. This destroys the old model of the brain as a glorified calculator. It reframes consciousness as a quantum phenomenon that exists before and beyond the physical structure. It also means consciousness isn't something your brain creates. It's something your brain accesses. That's not just semantics. That means consciousness isn't an effect. It's a cause. And that makes everything you experience, your thoughts, your intuition, your sense of connection to something greater, biologically and physically valid. Let's go deeper. ORCH-OR also explains altered states of consciousness in a way traditional neuroscience never could. States triggered by meditation, breathwork, lucid dreaming, or moments of spiritual clarity are often dismissed as hallucinations. But if quantum coherence in microtubules is responsible for awareness, then anything that affects those microtubules affects perception itself. Certain mental practices may enhance coherence. They may stabilize quantum processes, allowing you to interface with reality in a different way. That could explain why some experiences feel more real than waking life, because they aren't less real. They're access points into a deeper field of awareness. ORCH-OR also accounts for why consciousness appears to vanish under anesthesia. Anesthetic chemicals disrupt microtubule function. They don't shut down the entire brain. They disrupt coherence. The radio is still there, but the signal is jammed. Consciousness doesn't disappear because neurons stop firing. It disappears because the receiver stops tuning in. This isn't a fringe theory. ORCH-OR has peer-reviewed backing. It has mathematical models. It's been tested, refined, attacked, and yet it persists because it answers questions nothing else does. The resistance against it isn't scientific. It's ideological. Here's where it gets more controversial. If ORCH-OR is accurate, then consciousness doesn't die when the body dies. If awareness is rooted in quantum fields that persist beyond classical matter, then death isn't the end of experience. It's a transition of the signal. The radio breaks. The signal remains. That's not mystical speculation. That's a logical extension of the theory, which is why it's suppressed. Accepting this theory requires destroying the materialist foundation that modern science, education, and medicine are built on. You'd have to admit that the soul, or something like it, is not just poetic language, it's real. That spiritual insight might be a biological mechanism. That your connection to something infinite is not symbolic. It's literal. And once you accept that, control systems begin to collapse. You can't scare someone who knows they are more than their body. You can't manipulate someone who trusts their inner guidance more than outside authorities. You can't condition someone who knows consciousness isn't confined to this reality. And that's a threat to everything, from religion to government to corporate media. So the theory is attacked. The scientists are mocked. Funding is denied. But the evidence keeps growing. And the awakening keeps spreading. Because this isn't about convincing the world. This is about confirming what you already suspected. That strange feeling you've had. That pull toward something deeper. That sense that you're waking up inside a false reality. It's not delusion. It's biology meeting quantum physics. It's ancient wisdom finally receiving a scientific explanation. You're not tuning out of reality. You're tuning into it. And once you understand this theory, you can stop questioning your experience. You can stop doubting yourself every time you feel expanded. Because now there's a model that shows you're not crazy. You're quantum. This is the science they didn't want you to see. Not because it's flawed, but because it's powerful. It decentralizes consciousness. It legitimizes spiritual awakening. And it gives you a glimpse of what you truly are, something no institution can control. You are not a machine made of meat. You are not a brain in a box. You are a quantum system capable of awareness that touches every layer of existence. And your awakening isn't symbolic. It's physical. It's measurable. And it's already happening. This is what they tried to hide. But it's too late now. By now, you're beginning to see that consciousness isn't trapped inside your skull. It's something your brain interfaces with. But this interface isn't static. It isn't frozen in the shape it was handed to you by birth, schooling, or routine. Your brain, at the quantum level, reconfigures itself based on your state of awareness. And that's the part they really don't want you to understand. Because once you realize this, you stop being programmable. You become self-directed, biologically and spiritually. Your mind stops reacting to the noise of the world and starts tuning into a signal that's been there all along, waiting to be received. This isn't philosophy. This is physiology. And the more awake you become, the more that inner transformation rewires your system. It starts with microtubules. As we've already seen, these aren't just structural supports. They're the hidden processing units deep inside your neurons. And they're sensitive to frequency, coherence, and information that doesn't originate in the five senses. When someone starts to awaken, when they begin to question their programmed identity and feel that deeper shift within, something subtle begins to happen in these microtubules. They begin to resonate differently. They begin to stabilize quantum coherence longer. This means more conscious moments per second, more self-awareness, more ability to perceive patterns and signals that were previously invisible. You're not adding new information, you're removing distortion. And when distortion is removed, perception sharpens. Here's what that looks like inside the brain. Traditional neuroscience tracks brain changes using EEGs, MRIs, and scans that reflect chemical and electrical activity. What those scans miss is the subneuronal layer where the real transformation takes place. But even without measuring microtubules directly, there are ripple effects that become visible. One of the first shifts is decreased activity in the default mode network, DMN, a set of interconnected brain regions responsible for constructing your internal narrative. This is where your ego lives. Your sense of identity, your past, your assumptions about the world, all generated in this system. In awakening states, the DMN becomes quieter, not shut off, refined. As this happens, new connections begin to form between regions of the brain that don't usually communicate. This isn't random. It's the result of reduced mental noise and increased coherence. Your brain becomes a unified field rather than a chaotic echo chamber. And this coherence mirrors what's happening deeper inside the microtubules. In awakening states, your brain starts operating less like a computer and more like an antenna. You start receiving data from a different layer of reality. Insights don't arise from deduction, they appear fully formed. You don't think your way into truth. You tune into it. The old pathways designed for survival, fear, conformity start losing strength. The new pathways, rooted in observation, presence, intuitive clarity, get reinforced. This is neuroplasticity, but not the kind taught in textbooks. This is consciousness sculpting the brain to become a more accurate receiver. And here's where it gets even more physical. There's mounting evidence that practices like meditation, silence, focused breathing, and non-ordinary states of consciousness can alter the structure and behavior of microtubules. These practices don't just change brainwaves. They change what the brain becomes capable of processing. They allow more sustained quantum coherence in the microtubules, increasing the frequency and depth of conscious moments. Which means, every time you enter a higher state of awareness, you're physically upgrading your hardware. The implications are staggering. It means intuition isn't mystical. It's a higher bandwidth of perception. It means synchronicity isn't chance. It's the natural result of more precise coherence between your consciousness and the quantum field. It means spiritual awakening isn't mental. It's cellular. And this process doesn't stop. It compounds. The more you experience coherence, the more your brain learns to maintain it. The more you trust the silent knowing within you, the more those microtubules align, extending the window of perception even further. You begin to notice things others don't. Not because you're imagining it, but because your biology is tuned differently. You're not smarter, you're clearer. And clarity, when rooted in quantum alignment, can look like genius to the untrained mind. But this process doesn't come without resistance. Because every layer of false identity that breaks down sends a signal to your old brain. Panic. The survival circuits don't want you to awaken. They want you to repeat, conform, submit. And when you start shifting out of that old groove, the system throws static. Anxiety, confusion, ego backlash. Not because you're broken, but because you're recalibrating. You're shedding patterns that have calcified into the structure of your perception. And as that happens, the brain sometimes feels like it's malfunctioning. You question your thoughts, your reality, your sense of time. But you're not unraveling. You're untangling. And your microtubules are adjusting to a new mode of operation. They're holding coherence longer. They're accessing more complexity with less effort. You're not losing control, you're losing illusion. And with that, something incredible happens. You begin to experience perception without filter. Emotions arise, but they don't dictate. Thoughts occur, but they don't define. You observe them with distance, not because you've suppressed them, but because your reference point has shifted. You're no longer anchored in the voice in your head. You're anchored in the field that voice arises from. And your brain reflects that shift. Studies on advanced meditators and people in prolonged awakened states show a consistent pattern. Increased gamma wave activity, enhanced interhemispheric communication, and elevated coherence across distant brain regions. These aren't passive effects. They're consequences of sustained awakening, of a system that has stopped operating under fragmentation and started operating as a single quantum-aligned unit. This is what the ancient traditions hinted at with metaphors and rituals. But now the biology is catching up. We can point to it. we can track it, and we can prove it. The awakening isn't a metaphor anymore. It's a physiological transformation. And at the center of it are your microtubules. Tiny quantum engines inside your neurons, adjusting, realigning, upgrading with every silent insight you trust, every false belief you release, every deeper state you enter. You are physically becoming a more advanced receiver of reality. Not metaphorically, literally, which is why this knowledge is suppressed. Because when you know this, you stop needing external guidance. You stop chasing truth outside yourself. You stop obeying systems that depend on your confusion. You become self-evolving, self-referencing, and that makes you immune to manipulation. No one can sell you answers once you realize you were built to receive them. No one can control your mind once your brain stops filtering truth through fear. And no one can own your perception once your microtubules begin receiving the signal directly. This is why awakening feels disruptive. Because it's not just mental, it's biological, it's structural, and it's irreversible. Once the shift begins, there's no going back. And that's the point. Your brain is changing. Your system is reconfiguring. The illusion is crumbling. And what's replacing it isn't a new ideology, it's a new physiology. You're not learning more. You're becoming more. And now, you're starting to remember how this system was always designed to function, before it was buried under fear, trauma, and distraction. Awakening isn't a concept anymore. It's chemistry. It's circuitry. It's coherence. And it's already reshaping you from the inside out. The world you've been taught to see is a filtered construct, a projection of sensory inputs, processed by neural algorithms, shaped by language, history, and expectation. It looks solid, feels consistent, but behind that consistency is a filter, a limiter designed for survival, not for truth. What happens when that filter breaks? When the mind begins to stabilize in states beyond thought, when noise collapses and awareness becomes primary, a different kind of signal starts to emerge. Not louder, clearer. Not more complicated, more precise. That signal is not coming from the brain. It's not generated by neurons. It's not the result of memory, imagination, or intellect. It's a broadcast from a field that exists outside of time, space, and identity. A field your brain can interface with, but only when it stops trying to dominate the signal and starts tuning to it. The field has been called many things. Akasha, zero-point energy, unified field, divine intelligence. But its name doesn't matter. What matters is that it exists. It's not speculative. It's not wishful thinking. It's real, measurable, and increasingly studied by open-minded physicists, neuroscientists, and consciousness researchers. What we call consciousness isn't produced by the brain. It's accessed. The brain doesn't generate it. The brain modulates it. This is the signal your brain was built to receive, but only if it's coherent, quiet, and attuned. Let's be clear. Most minds never hear this signal. Why? Because static drowns it out. Thought loops, emotional turbulence, sensory overload, chronic stress. These all create noise that keeps your awareness trapped in the feedback loop of personality. In that state, the signal is still there, but it's like trying to hear a whisper through a jet engine. Awakening interrupts that loop, not because it introduces something new, but because it removes everything that blocks what's already present. The real shift occurs when awareness becomes still enough, spacious enough, and silent enough to receive data from this underlying field. But here's where it gets quantum. The field itself isn't distant. It's not out there. It's right here. Every point in space contains the whole. The signal doesn't travel. It's non-local. And microtubules, the quantum processors inside your neurons, are designed to collapse into coherence with that field. This isn't a metaphor. This is literal interface. Your microtubules behave like quantum antennas. When in a coherent state, they become phase-locked with quantum fluctuations that carry information far beyond what ordinary senses can detect. The field doesn't communicate in language. Communicates in structure, in resonance, in patterns that bypass the linear mind and emerge as instant knowing. This is why you don't analyze truth in awakened states. You receive it. The moment your brain's quantum coherence reaches a threshold, it stops generating fragmented perception and starts synchronizing with the informational geometry of the field. You don't think, you witness. You don't project, you perceive. And the signal you receive carries precision that thought can't replicate. You begin to notice how your body knows things before your mind does, how certain actions feel harmonized and others feel off. You stop asking for proof because the resonance itself becomes the validation. This is direct cognition. It has nothing to do with belief. Belief is mental. This is experiential. It doesn't depend on logic. It overrides logic with clarity so sharp that doubt becomes irrelevant. In that clarity, you begin to see how everything you once called me is a byproduct of interference. The persona, the identity, the history, they were distortions, necessary for survival but useless for awakening. And the more those distortions collapse, the stronger the signal becomes. At this point, you're not just accessing the field. You're synchronizing with it. And that synchronization changes everything. It changes how you perceive reality. You stop seeing objects. You start perceiving relationships, fields within fields. Events are no longer isolated. Time is no longer linear. You see causality ripple through layers of meaning that are invisible to the conditioned mind. It changes how you act. Decisions arise from coherence, not calculation. You don't weigh pros and cons, you sense alignment. Movement becomes effortless because you're no longer pushing through resistance. You're moving with the signal. It changes how you know. You stop seeking knowledge as accumulation. You experience it as revelation. The right idea, the exact phrase, the perfect insight, arriving without effort. Downloaded, not constructed. And that is the key difference between ordinary perception and awakened perception. Ordinary perception is computational. Awakened perception is resonant. Computational awareness breaks reality into parts, compares options, weighs risks. It's based on separation. Resonant awareness bypasses that. It locks into the source code beneath appearances. You don't analyze the world, you attune to it. And from that attunement, action arises without conflict. This is what the mystics described as effortless flow. Not because the world becomes easy, but because resistance is replaced by alignment. There's no internal fragmentation left to fight against. And it all hinges on your brain's ability to tune into the signal. But here's the secret few understand. The signal is always present. The only variable is your capacity to receive it. And that capacity can be developed. Every moment of stillness, every second of honest observation, every breath taken without agenda. It's all training. It teaches your system to maintain coherence in the presence of noise. It teaches your microtubules to stabilize superposition longer. It teaches your mind to remain in awareness without defaulting to narrative. This is not spiritual practice as escapism. This is spiritual engineering. You are retooling the most advanced antenna nature has ever built, your own nervous system, to pick up data from a non-local, hyper-intelligent field. And the better you get at receiving, the clearer the reality becomes. You begin to see how thought tries to hijack every insight, how language tries to box every experience, how the ego tries to claim ownership over the signal. But once you've tasted the purity of resonance, you stop falling for those traps. You don't reject thought, you contextualize it. You don't fight the ego, you transcend its framework. You don't need to convince anyone, because alignment isn't broadcast, it's embodied. This is why truly awakened individuals often speak less. Not because they don't know, but because they've realized that most of what's said in the world is noise. Words are clumsy vessels for a signal that's far more precise. And once you live by that signal, everything simplifies. There's no more confusion, no more contradiction, no more inner debate. Not because you've found the right philosophy, but because you've stopped filtering life through interpretation. You've learned to perceive without distortion. And that is the real purpose of this journey. Not self-improvement, not moral perfection, not even happiness. Clarity, not as an idea, as a biological state. A nervous system so clear it becomes transparent to the field. A brain so coherent it no longer filters reality, it reflects it. A self so silent it no longer seeks, it listens. And from that listening, the signal becomes your guide. Not a voice, not a feeling, not a command. A resonance, precision, a knowing so subtle, it's missed by minds addicted to speed. But for those who can hear it, everything changes. Because the moment the brain synchronizes with that signal, you no longer need answers. You've found the source. There's a reason most people never awaken. And it's not lack of intelligence, opportunity, or even interest. It's architecture. Consciousness is filtered by design. Society is structured around distraction. The world is engineered to reward compliance and punish inner clarity. The deeper you look, the more obvious it becomes. The system doesn't just ignore awakening, it prevents it. Not by accident, by strategy. Because awakening isn't profitable. Confused people consume. Distracted people obey. Disconnected people search endlessly for identity in possessions, ideologies, tribes, and roles. That search generates revenue, dependency, and control. But someone who sees through the illusion, they're not easy to manipulate. They don't respond to fear. They don't chase approval. They don't need to be told what to want, how to live, or who to be. And that's dangerous to a system built on mass hypnosis. So the trap has layers. The first layer is external, culture. Culture isn't neutral. It's a behavioral conditioning mechanism. From birth, it programs reward and punishment loops into your psychology. Conform and you're praised. Obey and you're accepted. Question and you're punished. Disobey and you're excluded. By the time most people are adults, they don't need to be watched. They've internalized the rules. They monitor themselves, police each other, mock anything that doesn't fit the script. This is not random. It's engineered compliance. The second layer is internal, identity. You're told what to be. Your name, your nationality, your gender, your religion, your history, your trauma. These become reference points that limit your perception of self. They define boundaries around what you're allowed to think, feel, express, and become. But here's the truth. None of it is real. Identity is a role, not a reality. And as long as you cling to the role, the signal can't break through. Why? Because awakening requires silence. And identity is noisy. It constantly demands validation, defense, and reinforcement. Every belief, every label, every psychological attachment creates friction, and that friction blocks resonance. The third layer is biochemical. It's not just psychological, it's physiological. Your brain is bathed in neurochemicals that reinforce specific modes of perception. Stress hormones amplify threat detection. Dopamine rewards conformity. Excessive stimulation numbs intuitive channels. Sugar, caffeine, artificial light, constant notifications, they all keep the nervous system locked in beta wave reactivity. In that state, the mind is hyperactive, the body is restless, and the signal is buried under static. Meditative states are not inaccessible. They're simply incompatible with the modern lifestyle. And that's no accident. Because the moment your system quiets, the illusion breaks. Stillness is not a luxury. It's a weapon. It destroys the false self and exposes the script. And the script is everywhere. The economy feeds on unconscious behavior. Education trains obedience, not wisdom. Media manufactures consensus. Politics divides attention. Entertainment provides sedation. Social media feeds addiction loops. Even spirituality is packaged and sold like a lifestyle accessory. All of it points in one direction, outward. But awakening is inward. And that's the crack in the machine. Because awakening doesn't require anything external. It only needs one thing, presence. Not ideas. Not belief systems. Not rituals. Presence. The one state that can't be monetized, sold, or controlled. Which is why it's been suppressed, trivialized, and distorted. The system teaches you to seek everything except presence. More success, more pleasure, more meaning, more stimulation. And while you chase it all, the signal waits, undetected, unrecognized, and unreceived. It doesn't force itself into awareness. Can't be heard through noise. It requires stillness, honesty, and direct perception. And that's rare because it's threatening. The signal doesn't flatter your ego. It destroys it. It doesn't confirm your beliefs. It dismantles them. It doesn't give you status. It strips you bare. That's why most people unconsciously resist it. Even those who say they want truth often only want comfort disguised as truth. Because real truth doesn't protect identity. It dissolves it. It doesn't strengthen your story. It ends it. And without that story, who are you? That question terrifies the system. Because someone who's no longer defined by their conditioning is unpredictable. Not impulsive, clear. Not rebellious, free. And freedom is ungovernable. You can't sell meaning to someone who's found it. You can't scare someone who's not attached. You can't bribe someone who's awake. So the system must maintain the illusion at all costs. That's why people get attacked when they get close to truth. Not physically, psychologically. They get flooded with distractions, doubts, emotional sabotage, external chaos. Everything in the matrix will escalate when you're on the edge of clarity. Why? Because you're pulling energy out of the collective mind field. And the field resists loss. But resistance is confirmation. The stronger the pushback, the closer you are to exit. Because once the final layer breaks, the illusion of self, the whole system loses its grip. You begin to see how media narratives are scripts, not reality. How social structures are illusions, not absolutes. How morality is manufactured, not divine. You don't reject the world, you see through it. And from that perception, a new world begins to emerge. Not because the external changed, but because your lens did. You begin to feel reality as vibration. You sense truth as frequency, not opinion. You recognize lies as distortion, not disagreement. Everything becomes energy. Everything becomes signal. And the moment that clarity stabilizes, the matrix can no longer seduce you. You still exist in the world, but you're not of it. You play the game, but you're not identified with the character. And because you no longer seek control, you become uncontrollable. That's the true revolution. Not political, not social, not economic, spiritual, not in the religious sense, in the energetic sense. A human being whose nervous system is aligned with the source field is more powerful than any institution. Because they can't be coerced, can't be manipulated, can't be broken. Their clarity disrupts the field. And that disruption spreads, not through effort, through resonance. One aligned frequency can deprogram thousands, not by preaching but by presence. And this is why the system fears awakening. It's not afraid of violence. It's afraid of coherence. Violence can be controlled. Coherence cannot, because coherence spreads silently. It breaks mental loops. It reconfigures perception. It liberates awareness from conditioning. And that's the endgame. Not to overthrow the system, to transcend it, to walk through the illusion, untouched, unbound, and awake. But most will never reach that point, because it requires the one thing most people have never practiced: inner silence. Not suppression, not avoidance, pure, alert silence. The kind of silence that listens without agenda. The kind of silence that sees without judgment. The kind of silence that receives without distortion. That silence is the gateway. And it's not found in books, techniques, or philosophies. It's found in what remains when all of that collapses. When thought stops being a master and becomes a tool. When emotion stops being a ruler and becomes a signal. When self stops being a center and becomes a window. Then and only then does the signal break through. And once it does, you'll never see reality the same way again. Not because you've added something, because you've removed what blocked the obvious. The truth was never hidden. Only your attention was. And the final control layer isn't the media, the government, or the economy. It's your own identification with the noise. Break that and the signal is yours. Forever. There comes a point where truth is no longer something you seek. It becomes something you are. But arriving at that point is not a result of accumulation. It's not about gathering more knowledge, mastering more techniques, or collecting more spiritual vocabulary. That's the trap. The idea that the real answer is always just one book away, one meditation away, one retreat away. It's not. The real answer is already present. But it's obscured by layers of illusion, distraction, and distortion. To break through permanently, the signal shift must happen at the root level. Not at the level of thought. Not at the level of emotion. Not even at the level of energy in the typical sense. It must happen at the level of identification. Because what you identify as determines the bandwidth of your perception. If you identify as the thinker, you're limited to thoughts. If you identify as the body, you're bound to sensation. If you identify as a personality, you're trapped in memory. But the signal, true consciousness, is not bound by any of these. It's not the content. It's the container. It's not the noise. It's the awareness of the noise. And it can't be grasped. Can only be recognized. This is the real awakening. Not a mystical event. Not a dramatic transformation. Not a sudden explosion of bliss. It's the quiet, undeniable realization. You are not the content of your mind. You are the witnessing field in which that content arises. This realization is not intellectual. It's not emotional. It's not a conclusion, it's a shift in frequency. And it happens the moment the false signal collapses. Here's the catch. The false signal is seductive. It speaks with your voice. It wears your face. It uses your past to justify its presence. It mimics intuition. It imitates inspiration. But it's all feedback from the program. And as long as you're engaged with it, arguing, analyzing, negotiating, you're still inside the loop. To break the loop, you must stop feeding it attention. You must shift from being in the mind to observing the mind. From reacting to thoughts to watching them arise and dissolve without attachment. This is where most seekers get stuck. Because silence feels empty at first. Feels like something is missing. But what's missing is the noise. The constant stimulation you've been conditioned to call you. When that drops, the silence feels disorienting. But that's not confusion. That's recalibration. You're no longer reinforcing the old signal. You're letting it decay. And what's left behind is not a blank state. It's clarity. It's precision without effort. Perception without distortion. Presence without agenda. From that clarity, you begin to perceive the world differently. Not as objects. Not as categories. Not as judgments. But as vibration. Every person, every place, every thought, every situation, vibration. You stop reacting to content. You start responding to frequency. And that's where power returns. Because reaction is always conditioned. But response is conscious. Reaction reinforces the matrix. Response reveals the signal. Once this becomes consistent, the illusion loses its hold. The body still operates. The mind still produces thoughts. Emotions still arise. But they no longer own you. They pass through awareness, but they don't define it. You are not what happens in awareness. You are the awareness in which it happens. This shift is irreversible when stabilized. Because once you see that you are not the voice in your head, you can't go back to believing it. Once you see that attention is the currency of your reality, you stop spending it on what drains you. Once you realize that presence is the doorway to all insight, you stop chasing ideas. And once you stop chasing, the signal arrives. effortlessly, because it was never gone. You were just tuned to the wrong channel. Here's the truth most systems will never say. There is no distance between you and the source. There is no ladder to climb. There is no timeline to fulfill. There is only this now. And either awareness is identified with form or it's not. Either attention is trapped in content or it's free. This binary shift, this quantum moment is awakening. Not an end. Not a destination. Correction. A restoration of what was always true, always present, and always available. But this restoration threatens the ego, because ego wants to maintain control, and control requires narrative. So ego will constantly present new stories, new goals, new fears, new identities to defend. The only way to stay free is to stop energizing the mechanism. This doesn't mean suppressing thought. It means not believing it. It means recognizing that the voice in your head is a fragment loop, based on past impressions, memory patterns, and external programming. And the more you observe it without merging with it, the more it dissolves. Until thought becomes what it was always meant to be, a servant, not a master. Now, let's make this practical. You don't need to change your life to awaken. You don't need to isolate, renounce, or escape. You need to do one thing: withdraw identification from everything that arises. Observe the emotion, but don't say, "This is my feeling." Notice the thought, but don't say, "This is my opinion." Feel the sensation, but don't say, "This is my body." What happens when you do this? You don't become passive. You become clear. Clarity is not inactivity. It's intelligent action without confusion. It's spontaneous alignment with the field. It's moving without distortion. And when you move from that space, your entire life shifts. Not because you tried to change it, but because you stopped resisting what's true. That's the ultimate signal shift. Reality stops reflecting your conditioning and starts mirroring your coherence. People show up differently. Opportunities align effortlessly. Problems dissolve without force. This isn't magic. It's physics. Coherence restructures the field. And the most coherent signal in the universe is presence. Not the idea of presence. Not the technique of presence. Pure, undivided attention, free from identity, narrative, and expectation. This is the real power. And it cannot be taken, copied, or sold. Can only be lived. So how do you stabilize this state permanently? Not by effort, but by vigilance. The moment the ego hijacks awareness again, and you don't fight it. You recognize it. You watch it. And you return. Return again and again and again. Not to a belief. Not to a philosophy. But to the silence underneath all of it. This is how the loop ends. Not through battle. Through refusal to energize distortion. Through loyalty to the signal of truth within. Through fearless honesty with your own attention. And when that honesty becomes your baseline, nothing can manipulate you anymore. You're not influenced by fear, seduced by praise, or defined by resistance. You don't need to argue with illusions. You simply stop living inside them. And from that stance, awakening is not just an experience, it becomes your signal. A field of clarity that others feel before you speak. A frequency that reorders chaos without control. A presence that reminds others of their own signal. This is the final shift. Not a transformation into something new, but a return to what was always true. You are not the voice. You are not the past. You are not the image, the name, the role, or the idea. You are the awareness watching it all. And the more you live from that awareness, the more everything aligns. Not because you forced it, but because truth only flows where distortion has been cleared. That clearing is awakening. That signal is yours. And it's been waiting. The question is, will you stop long enough to hear it? Because once you do, the game ends. And reality begins.